Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event. We'd like to extend our thanks to a good number of people who have helped make this all possible. I'm David Brule of the Nolumbeka Project Incorporated. I'll talk a little bit about who we are in a minute, just a few sentences. But first, uh, a few thank yous are in order, of course. One, certainly to the lady, the woman who is hosting us today, Lisa McLaughlin. We are really very thankful for all of her expertise and her enthusiasm. Diane Dix is our events coordinator. She's really been a force in the Nolumbeka project, and we really need to thank her publicly for everything she does concerning all of the events we have. Some of our sponsors need to be noticed and thanked. The Mascoma Bank up there in Vermont, the Babson 2020 Fund of the uh, Peace Development Fund of Foundation of this valley here. Great River Hydro also played an enormous role. And again, a special shout out to the Babson Fund, who has been a staunch supporter of our efforts all the way through, especially in our gardens up here in Greenfield. We'd like to acknowledge and thank Carrie Brennan of Thetford Academy. You may know that originally we would have on March 14th been having this event there, but of course the circumstances prevented that, and we really thank Carrie of the Academy for being totally willing and able to host us. Colin Calloway of the Dartmouth College also played a significant role, a great inspiration to us all in terms of his research. Certainly the connection we have with the Native American Studies program at Dartmouth College was also a significant partner in this endeavor. If it had happened at Thetford Academy, the Connecticut River Conservancy is also a strong supporter of this program. A special shout out to Jack Elliott of the Lime Inn, who was prepared to offer considerable hospitality to our guest speakers. But again, once again, that didn't come to pass. Some of our personal favorites from up that way would be Chief Don Stevens, and from hello to Brian Blanchette, who was ready and willing to provide us with some musical interludes during the original schedule. In case you are not familiar with our group, the Nolumbeka Project, I like to identify as a kind of an association of educators, and our principal goal is to bring events like this to within the reach of people who don't get a chance to, let's say, mix, mingle, interact with the Native American tribes in our Connecticut River Valley. We sponsor 4 events, principally during the year. Our keynote event is the Pocumtuck Homelands Festival that occurs in August, the first weekend of August. It's a 2-day musical festival, wonderful performers, all of Native indigenous people from, I guess we were close to having hosted about 12 different tribes over the past 6 years. So keep that in mind. Hopefully we'll all be able to get together in the outdoors in August, Saturday and Sunday, 2 days of free music. I'd like also to mention the fact that we are involved in a significant pollinator protection program. We have a number of people that we collaborate with in terms of developing pollinator gardens. Both our featured speakers are involved in those programs where we go into the schools to teach students about the importance of the pollinators we have and the danger they're under. I'd like to also mention the fact that we are uh, in this endeavor, we had imagined beginning this series of events starting in March and ending in October by inviting the Abenaki uh, cultural representatives from the headwaters, and we will finish in October in the Nahantic traditional homelands. I've descended from that particular tribe. I'm very proud of that. And so our traditional homelands are at the mouth of the Connecticut. So it kind of makes a complete circle in a way, although we have a long 450-mile river. Not much of a circle there, but nevertheless, we have the Beneki tribal people at the headwaters and the Nahantic tribal people at the mouth of the river. We will be having a wrap-up event at the Connecticut River Museum in Essex in October, and perhaps a final social stomp or some dance at GCC much later on in November. It all depends on where we are in a number of months from now. So basically, this River Stories 2020 concept began a number of years ago in conversation that I had with a few of the other Nolumbeka people, as well as a Quina Wampanoag lady, Elizabeth James Perry, and we were talking about finding a way to celebrate the cultures of the Connecticut River and to stress the importance of water. There is a ceremonial concept and what would I call it, event action called the River Walk. We were considering calling this a river walk for a long time, but we were not actually going to walk along the river, or also we felt perhaps it would be culturally inappropriate to name an event for what was a very sacred ceremony among tribal people. So it evolved that we would call this the River Stories. And the River Stories concept also is to serve as a counterbalance to some of the events that are going down or were going to happen in Plymouth, as we all are familiar with through our school history courses and classes, that the Pilgrims arrived in 1620. And we think, as Indigenous people in this part of the Northeast, that led to a series of very tragic events that have been ongoing since 1620. There were a number of events that caused great damage to the Indigenous peoples, leading up through the Pequot War, the King Philip's War, and beyond. And there was a series of rolling massacres, attacks, all the way on through to the late 1900s. Excuse me, the late 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. So what we sought to do was to bring some kind of a counterbalance to the events that would be glorifying the arrival of the Europeans in Plymouth by seeking out leadership among the Indigenous peoples along the Connecticut River. So we envision starting with the Nulhegan Abenaki, who would have been represented by Chief Don Stevens, which I hope we will be able to host perhaps in April. We're hoping for a Brattleboro event, April 18th, April 19th. It is yet to be determined, but if not, we will do another video webinar. So those are my main points. we will be having a number of events all the way down the river valley from after this, hopefully in Brattleboro, but then in the month of May 16th, at the site where the massacre occurred at the falls. And then we will move on down through Springfield and bounce back to Amherst at the Hitchcock Center and do a number of other events all the way on down through till we finish up at the Connecticut River Conservancy, the Connecticut River Museum. So I'm about ready to cease speaking. I hope that you will all enjoy the next hour and a half, 2 hours of programming that you will feel free to ask questions and hear from our featured speakers. So thank you and welcome, and let us hear from Jesse and Joe Bruchac. Thank you.
Now.
Kwai kwai, Domak. Hello, my friends. De Louise is Soza, Aleno Kira Hosit. My name is Joseph for the Peaceful One. And I is Salatogi, Alamobizon Peak. I am of the place called Saratoga, or the Medicine Spring place. And I greet you in the language of our people. When we gather together, it is always important to remember the waters. Water is one of the greatest gifts of the Creator. The rain that falls, the streams that flow, the blood in our bodies is all linked together. It is one great circle that connects all beings. Whenever I drink water, I try to remember what my elders taught me, which is always say thank you for that gift of water. Without it, we could not survive. And that water that flows through the rivers, we must do our best to keep it clean. We must remember that every river has a source, and every river flows to the same ocean, connecting us all together. So we say greeting, and we say thanks to the waters, to the rains and the snows that fall, to the small streams that begin to flow. The great river is like the Quanituk, the long river that carries that water back into the sea. And as the clouds rise up from that ocean, it circles back again and returns. It is always returning. We say, Kitsi, Orioni. We say, great thanks to all the waters of this land. And then we give them the greeting song.
Kwai kwai Nolumbeka and De Louise, Jesse Bruchac, Kitsiulu Nimitongus. My name is Jesse Bruchac. I say thank you to my father for opening today, and Kitsiulu for having us here and for joining us, all of those who joined us. This is a greeting song, and those waters my father spoke of, that circle of the water. There's also a circle of movement along those rivers that people would follow seasonally, traveling and visiting one another along and during those travels. Greeting songs would be sung. And so we'll begin today with one of those greeting songs. There are many different versions of the greeting song. As it would be sung, it was to announce your arrival and to let the people know on the shore, in La Cloison, in those places where communities were located along the rivers, that you were coming and who you were. And then a response would come from the shore. If you were recognized and welcome to land your canoe, to enter that community and share some more music, dance, some stories, perhaps some food with one another, a welcoming song would be sung back from the shore. And so we'll begin today. I'm going to sing as if I were one of those paddlers traveling on our old super highways, in our old vehicles, the wigwal, the canoes, in the Sibawal, the rivers, and singing the greeting song. Yo gono de o ganuda, hey gono de o ganuda, gayo ani he Gayawani hey ayo yo hey. Gayawani hey ayo yo hey. Gayawani hey ayo yo hey. You gonna de yo wano da. Hey, wano de yo wano da. Wano de wano de wano de wano da. Wano de wano de wano de wano da. Wano de wano de hey, wano de wano de hey, wano de wano da. Wano de wano da.
Nisno Siboal means two rivers. And a few years ago, in order to bring together those two rivers of the indigenous language and the European English language, which is now ours as well, not a foreign language any longer, Jesse and I put together a little book of poems in the Abenaki language and in English. And this first poem, the one we're going to share with you, is called Nisno Siboal, which simply means two rivers.
I'd like to first acknowledge my own Aga Kigamwino, Cecile Wawinolet. I learned I was lucky enough to hear many Abenaki speakers and still work with people speaking the language, but it was really her who shared the most, and with not only with me, but with so many people. And we're lucky to still have both of these two rivers, the Abenaki language still spoken to this day. And in this poem, it goes like this: two rivers. Nisnol Siboal. Pazgwen litan ahkik, Pazgwen litan mlawonganek, Nisnol Siboal, Kanwa awak Pazgwen. Pazgwen umila abazikok, Pazgwen umila nzitzakok. Nisnol Siboal, Kanwa awak Pazgwen, awa asak, sipsak, namasak, maskadza monko sisak. Mziwik migik, pumosach hadit, takasmi hidit. Pamigwazi hidit, Pamidoozi hidit, Kados muak pazbun sibok. Eni mila pomozoongan, Mziwik lida honzi hidit, Ombadala mi hidit, Melis zon hidit, Pazbun sibo, Monsana, Ali gagal noak ta gika, Pazbun sibo onda mina no pairi ondaki nasawan. Pazgwen sibo lalmongan pak holi ganek nisnon siboal widzitanal nisnon siboal kanwa awak pazgwen.
It's been said that the Abenaki language is as beautiful as the songs of the birds, the wind flowing through the trees, and that language you just heard, and now in English, two rivers. One flows from the earth, one flows from the heart, two rivers, but they are one. One gives to the trees, one gives to the spirit, two rivers, but they are one. The animals, the birds, the fish, the insects, all of those who swim, all of those who crawl, all of those who fly, drink from one river. It gives them life. All of those who think, all of those who laugh, all of those who weep are touched by one river that holds them and heals. One river, though further away than breath, one river, its voice the beat of the drum. Two rivers flow together, two rivers, but they are one. I want to share with you one of our traditional stories. And as I do this, imagine that you're sitting in a circle inside this longhouse with me. And when I say ho, you would respond by saying, hey, to show me you are still awake and you are listening and part of the story. And this story has to do with this time of year. It is a very old story that goes back to our people to the north, our cousins, the Cree people. I learned this story more than 40 years ago from a Cree elder. And when this story was told, he told it at this very time of year. The time when the snow is leaving the land, when the birds are returning. And this story goes like this. A long time ago, Kitsinawask, the Great Spirit, the Great Mystery, called together all of the animals. It was before the human beings walked upon this earth. And things were not yet set in place. What was not yet set were the 4 seasons. How long would each of these seasons be? The spring, the summer, the fall, and the winter. And it began with the winter. For indeed, we say to this day that we measure our years by winters. If you have lived 3 years, you've actually lived through 3 winters, we'd say. You are that many winters old. So all the animals, the wise ones, the ones who were here before we human beings who walk on 2 feet, they gathered together, and Kitsinawask, the Great Mystery, or Kichimanito, as he is called by the Ojibwe, Kichimanito, the same Great Spirit, to all of our Algonquin people, said, how long should winters be? Each of the animals spoke up. The beaver said, the winter should be as long, as many moons as there are scales on my tail. That would have been very long indeed. Now, the porcupine spoke up and said, that should be as long as there are quills on my body. Again, that would be very long. Oh, and then the bear spoke up and said, no, winter should be as long as there are hairs all over me. And that would have been very, very long. Each of them spoke until finally only one being was left, and that one would get the final say. It was little Omokaki, the little frog. That little frog spoke up and said, I think there should be as many moons in winter as there are fingers on my hand. And it was decided that was how it would be. So it is from back then to this day that 4 moons make up winter. And when spring comes, you hear those small frogs in the streams and in the rivers chanting and singing their praise and their thanksgiving for the coming again of this special season of spring. Hope, and that is how that story goes.
In addition to the Tsigualak, the frogs who come peeping back at this time of year. In fact, the word frog in Abenaki, Tsigual, Sak means to divide, and Gual means its life. And the frog, as we know, lives a divided life, both in the water and on the land. And others above the land return. The Sipsak, who we spoke of in that poem, Nisno Siboal, the Sipsak come flying, the songbirds return. And it was the songbirds who were, we say, the inspiration for music. They're the singers, the ones who first sang to give thanks for each new sunrise, each new dawn upon our land. It was the birds who were given that initial job to say Kitsilioni, to say thank you for that new day, for each new day. And at this time of year, we can be extra thankful because we hear the songbirds coming back, Quiscas, the robin, and others. And I'd like to share with you some music on this flute. Music that, as I said, was initially inspired by, and in fact, they say the first flute was made because of the actions of a woodpecker on a rotted out branch of a red cedar tree, looking for food for maskadzamonkosisak, those insects. It hollowed out and made holes in that branch. When Kizilom Sin, the wind blew over that branch, made a beautiful sound, and he was inspired by that sound to create a flute. Listening to the birds, created many songs. So I'd like to play a song for you that incorporates that breath that we all share, that breath of life, another circle that's so important that unites us in song through the flute. Like to share another story with you. And as my father did, every so often I'll say, ho, and I'd love to encourage all of you to join in and let us know that you are still paying attention and listening by saying, hey. They say that long ago, there was a trickster in our land. But the beauty of a story about a trickster is that we as children and also as adults can learn the results of the bad behavior, the results of what happens when trickster makes the mistakes that he makes. And sometimes even when we're old enough to be wise enough not to do foolish things, we still do them. And so these stories are important to everyone, and especially stories about Raccoon, who's the trickster here in the Northeast, the trickster among many Abenaki stories, as well as among the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk, share stories of Raccoon as well. And one day Raccoon heard the song of one of those songbirds. It was Walonwigi Sibs, the bluebird. Bluebird was singing a beautiful song. It was this time of year, and Osban, the raccoon, was bored. He didn't have anything to do. So he followed the sound, that beautiful sound, until he was standing beneath a branch, and he looked up, and there on that branch was that Walonwigi Sibs singing a beautiful song. Well, that was a female bird, Squahla, and it was sitting on top of an azasa, maybe owanal, with eggs inside of that nest. It's that time of year, and Osban looked up and said, "Oh, why, Nido Batanikadolzin?" Oh, Walonwigi Sibs was polite and said, "Why, Nido Banolzi? Uliuni, Nikia? Good, I'm living well. How are you?" Oh, Osban said, "I'm so bored. Would you come down and play with me for a little while? You have a beautiful voice. Perhaps we could make some music together." And that sounded like fun for Walonwigi Sibs, but that bluebird had a job to do. It was spring. She was sitting on her nest with those eggs. She just looked down and said, "Onda, no. I need to stay here and take care of my young." "Oh, Liula Damana," Osman said, "please come play with me. We'll have so much fun." And that Walonwigi Sibs looked down again and said, "Onda, Osman, I know who you are. You're the trickster. If I come and play with you, you'll just eat my eggs right out of my nest." Well, she was a smart bird. And Raccoon knew it. He just looked up and said, "Oh, you can't blame me if playing makes me hungry." Oh, hey. Well, he knew that that bluebird was far too smart. She was going to stay and protect her eggs. And so he moved on. He used his ears again, and this time he heard a beautiful sound. It was the sound of a river. And he followed that sound, listening, until he came to the edge of that river. He saw which way it was flowing, and he started to follow it. It's fun to play along the side of a river. And he followed that river down, all around its bends, and came to a place where that great sound he heard was coming from. It was a Panza Honk, a place where a mountain dropped off. There was a cliff, and the water fell right off, creating a Panza Honk, creating a waterfall. And Osban stood right up on the edge of that waterfall and looked down and listened. It was so powerful. Making that noise, that water was so powerful that Osban decided he would challenge that water to a contest. He thought he could defeat that water. And so he yelled down and said, "I can make a louder noise than even you, Pope." And Osban opened up his raccoon mouth and began to yell. But you couldn't hear anything from Osban's voice. All you could hear was the powerful water, the water rushing down, hitting those rocks, spraying up, hitting Osban. Oh, he was so upset. He decided to try again. He stopped. He stood a little closer to the edge of that cliff. He breathed in a little bit deeper into his little raccoon lungs, and he yelled even louder. And when he yelled this time, all you could hear was Panzaho, the sound of that waterfall, the water crashing down on the rocks below. Osban got he got angry. He stood a little closer to the edge of the cliff. He breathed in deeper. He yelled a third time, but a third time, all you could hear was the sound of that powerful water crashing down below. So Osban, a fourth time, got really close. His little raccoon toes were hanging right off the edge of those slippery rocks on the edge of that Kadzigapskazo Wadzo of that cliff. And he breathed in and breathed in and breathed in and went to yell. But when he did, something happened. He had been yelling so much. And he was standing so close to the edge that he became Giwana Squahla. He became dizzy. And instead of yelling, he slipped and he fell right into that waterfall. All the way down, where he was defeated by that waterfall. In fact, Osban was killed, his body floating down the river for a long time. But don't worry about Raccoon. Trickster stories are so important to all of us that no matter what happens to Osban, he always comes back to life again. There are so many lessons that we have to hear and learn. Hope that before long his body washed up to one of those bends in the river, the washed right up onto the shore, and he laid there, still good and dead. And as he lay there, one of the crayfish people, the Songasis, saw that raccoon lying on the shore. Now, you should know that raccoon's favorite food are little crayfish. But you should also know that crayfish love to eat anything that dies and washes up on the shore. And this crayfish saw that great big dead raccoon and thought two things. One, the man-eater is gone. He's died. And two, what a great feast he would be. But that crayfish wanted to share this news with everyone else. And so it swam right back down to the bottom of that river. It started to tell the other crayfish people what it had seen. It said, the man-eater is dead. He's lying on the shore. And people started to ask him, how do you know? Did you see how he was killed? At that moment, that little crayfish decided to do something we should never do. Pizonzamik, useless speech. Literally, and its meaning is a lie. Began to pizonzamik, began to lie. He began to create a story about what happened. He said, I know he's dead because he attacked me like he always does. The man-eater tried to eat me. He reached down in under a rock where I was hiding and I pinched him very, very hard and I hurt him so badly. We wrestled back and forth. Eventually, I threw him and defeated him. And he lay there. Still, it would be a great feast for our people. We should celebrate. Everybody said, wahoo, this is a great story. And they brought that little crayfish all the way to the chief, the Songomon, the chief of all the great crayfish people at the bottom of that river, sat and listened to this great story, just nodded and said, oh, this is a good story. Bring us to see the man-eater. And so that little crayfish led all of his people to the edge of the river. And all of his people were very nervous to look and see. They didn't want to come up out of the water, so they tried so hard to look that their eyes popped right up out of their heads and stuck right up out of the water, the way that they do to this day. Well, they could see that sure enough, just as that crayfish had said, Osban looked uli matsina, good and dead, laying there on the shore. But the chief was wise. Said, if you truly did as you told me in your story, you wouldn't be afraid to climb up out of the water first and make sure that Osban is truly dead. Oh, Pakamagwat, that little Songasi said, and crawled right up out of the water and stood on the shore and turned around and waved. Said, oh, Gina, Agama Olimatsina, look, he's truly dead. But the chief wasn't happy. Nsada, a second time, he said, if he is truly dead, you wouldn't be afraid to go over and poke him. Now that little Songasi's got a little scared, but he gotten himself into this, so he slowly crawled over towards Raccoon's body and poked him. Raccoon didn't move at all. He's dead, look, he hasn't moved. But the chief wasn't happy. Insada, a third time, he called out and said, if Osban is truly dead, you should be able to climb right up on his belly without him waking up. Well, now that little crayfish was really scared, but started to pinch onto the fur of Raccoon and climbed his way right up onto Raccoon's belly, stood up and waved and said, Kina, Kina, Agama, Ulimatsina, he's good and dead. He yelled out a fourth time. Chief yelled out and said, if he's truly dead, you wouldn't be afraid to climb right up on to his face, reach out and pinch him right on his nose. Then we will be sure. We'll have a great feast then. Oh, so he said, sure. And he slowly climbed right up onto Osban's face near all those sharp teeth, reached out and pinched Osban's nose. Now, at that moment, Osban's nose started to work again because, as I mentioned, raccoons love crayfish. And Raccoon could smell that crayfish right near his nose, but he also knew there were more crayfish nearby and didn't move at all, just laid there, pretending to be dead. Crayfish waved one last time, Kina, Kina, Agama Uli Matsina. And the chief said, Wahoo, it's true, he's dead. And they all began to dance. They danced right up out of the river, believing the story, believing what they had seen. They started to dance in a great circle. They celebrated the death of the man-eater. They sang, we guy one, we guy one, we guy one, we guy one. They danced for so long that they got very tired. And they sat down on their little crayfish bottoms, ready to have their feast when Osban jumped up. Said, Kitsiu Leonie, thank you for inviting me to your feast, my friends. And that raccoon ate all of those crayfish. Oh, so it's very important. It's very important the things we tell our people. And it's very important never to celebrate the death of anyone, not even your worst enemy. And that is how that story goes. Thank you.
There has been a bit of publicity these days about what's been happening to our cousins, the Wampanoag people. In David's introduction, he mentioned that, of course, that was where the Europeans came first. They were greeted and they were helped. People such as Tisquantum made sure they knew how to live on this land, how to find food, how to grow their crops. If it were not for the Wampanoag people, there would be no country that we have now, with European people controlling it. But sadly, many things were brought by those Europeans, including the idea, which is very interesting, that they could determine who truly was an indigenous person. You know, dogs and horses and Native Americans are the only ones who are measured by their blood. They could say then that to be a real Native American, you had to legally be recognized by the federal government or the state government. I remember Homer St. Francis, our chief long ago of when we were the St. Francis Sokoke band before it became Nolumbeka, saying that maybe they don't recognize us, but then we don't recognize them first. Sadly, what has happened to our Wampanoag brothers and sisters is that the federal government recently decided to de-recognize the Wampanoag Nation, to take away their recognition, their right to call themselves Native Americans, their right to have their own land held in trust by the federal government, the right to have their community recognized. They have not given up. People such as Jesse Little Dobert, who is working still to renew and continue the Wampanoag language, which was gone for so long. They're out there trying to fight to return their recognition. The reason why something like this has happened, I'm sorry to say that it may be because the Wampanoag were about to open their own casino. And there were those powerful people who did not want a casino to be opened by that group of Native people. But for whatever reason, our Wampanoag cousins, brothers and sisters are in need of our awareness and our help. And I urge you to find out everything you can, to do whatever you can, to be aware of this situation and to help. One of our dear friends is an elder named Manatolonquat, medicine story. In fact, 2 years ago, Jesse and I had the honor of being part of a program in New Hampshire doing storytelling along with Manatolonquat medicine story. This story I'm going to share is one that he taught me many, many, many years ago. He even published it in a book, Children of First Flight, Stories of the Wampanoag People. Within this story, there is one who is a great hero. Well, our great hero in our Beneki tradition is called Gluskomba or Gluskabi or Kuluskap, depending which of the 5 principal languages of the Wabanaki people are spoken. Their hero is called Malsha. I believe he is much the same, who does great things to help the people. Now, long ago, as is true today, the sun would come every morning and shine down on the land of the people of First Flight, for that is what Wampanoag means, just like Wabanaki, it means light or drawn land, the place where the sun rises first. And the people no longer did what they had been told to do long ago. They stopped saying thank you to the sun. Instead, they would look up at it and squint their eyes because it was so bright or turn away from it. And seeing this, the sun felt hurt. The sun said, "These people are not grateful. They're not glad to see me. I decide this. I will no longer come to their land." And so the sun stayed on the other side of the world and did not return. And when the next day came, the sun did not rise. It remained dark. Now, for a while, the people were pleased. They were able to sleep a long time and rest. But when that night kept going on and on and on, the people began to wonder what had happened. When they realized the sun was not coming, they became afraid. They began to call out for help. And who heard them? Moshe. He woke up hearing the people crying in fear of the dark, in terror of what would happen now. And he came to them and said, "What is wrong?" And they said, "Oh, Moshe, the sun did not come back. Can you go see what has happened?" Malshap agreed. He would do what he could to help. He turned, faced the direction where the sun always rose. And then he began to grow taller and taller and taller and taller until he was an even bigger giant than he had been before. And then he began to wade through the water in the direction where the sun was. When he reached that other side of the world, the sun was there in the sky shining down, and all around people were looking up at the sun and saying, "Oh, what a lovely, warm, beautiful day. What a wonderful day. We're so happy about this." Moshe spoke to the sun. He said, "My great friend, the people want you. The Dawnland people miss you. Please return." But the sun did not agree. The sun said, "No. Those people, they don't say hello. They don't say thank you. They just make faces at me. I am not ever going back there again." Malshap saw he would have to do something. And so he went to the spider, to Grandmother Spider. He said, "Grandmother, I want you to do something for me. I want you to weave a net from your strongest strands." Spider did just that. She made a huge net, and Malshap took that net and threw it over the sun, pulled it tight, and put the end of the net over his shoulder and began to walk back toward the Dawnland. It was a long journey. But when he got there, the people, seeing the sun, raised their hands and said, "Thank you. Oh, great sun, we're happy to see you. Thank you for coming. We love you." And the sun, hearing those words, said, I guess I should come back. As long as even one person remembers to say thank you in the morning, I will return. And so it is to this day that the sun always returns to our land. As long as even one person remembers to say thank you, it will continue that way in the future. You know, sometimes if you look up into the sky, you'll see in the clouds the shape of the tatters of that net that Malshop used long ago to trap the sun and pull it back to our land. One of my dear friends, a Mohawk elder named Tom Porter, told me long ago that the most sacred word, the sacred words you can say, Uyoni, or Nyalwecha, or in English, thank you. For when we give thanks, all good things follow. We remain thankful, all good things will come to us. So I have been told, and so I believe it to be so. Hope.
I'd like to share another song. My father mentioned thanks, and this is a feasting song from the Maliseet people. He also mentioned the different nations of Wabanaki peoples. We have to the first, to the east, meeting the sun, are the Mi'kmaq people, furthest north and east, then the Maliseet and Passamaquoddy. And this is a song that comes from the Maliseet. Been singing it for about 20 years now. It's very popular among Wabanaki peoples, and it gives thanks. It says thanks for the gifts that were given, the gifts of food. It would be sung before any gathering. We also mentioned the Wampanoag people, and that idea of thanksgiving is attributed, of course, to the pilgrims, to the Wampanoags, to the gifts that were given to the pilgrims by Tisquantum. But Thanksgiving isn't something that needs to happen once a year. It's something that needs to happen within us every day. And to say thank you within our language is actually to acknowledge. It's to recognize something, to see that it is there. If we're not thankful, we often forget about the gifts that are there. To say something is good, ulioni, to name its goodness, reminds us of how important it is. It's an acknowledgement. So this song is an acknowledgement of the food, that gift that was given long ago to the pilgrims, something that should never be forgotten. As my father again mentioned, a reason why we have this nation we have today, for all the good and all the faults. It is something very important and to be thankful for. So this song, we say Kitsiliani to the Wampanoag people, Kitsiliani to every one of our relatives here, to all our relations, and to the Maliseet people from whom this song comes. He go, he gane, queo he, queo he. Guanali aguano de, guanali aguano de. Guanaldia guanudan eu ga Guanaldia guano de Guanalia guano de Guanalia guano dan I'd like to share another story about kind of our aspirations and our dreams. The Guasawongan, the drum, Pakoligan, and dream, Laguasawongan, are two things when spoken of within the Abenaki language we see very differently. It's one of the reasons why the work of Jesse Little Dobert along the Wampanoag, my own work, the work of so many people to work together and preserve the indigenous languages of our lands is so important. They don't just give us new ways to say things, they give us new ways to see things, new relationships to these places, especially to the rivers, The rivers themselves, the flow of those rivers, like the drum and like the dream, are all considered living beings. They're all animate. The world is divided in between a half of the world which is considered inanimate and a half that is animate. Unlike in English, where we only speak of who or he or she, usually of human beings, even of animals, we could say, what kind of horse is it? What kind of tree is it? Could never say that in Nolumbeka. We'd say, who is that tree? Who is that horse? Who is that drum? Who is that dream? Even the flow of the river is a who, not a he or a she either, as there's no gender. The gender instead is replaced by this idea of animacy and inanimacy, and all of our verbs and our adjectives follow in suit behind whether or not we're speaking of something that is living or not living. And dreams, as we know, carry so much. In this time where we're in our homes, in our wigwam, wigwamau, it's a Nolumbeka word, wigwam, the place where we reside, literally. While we're in our residence now, it was long ago that stories were what carried us from the first frost to the last frost. A time when there wasn't much to do, but it was a great time to learn. It was a great time to hear songs, to dance, to share food, and of course, stories. In those stories were the dreams of the past and perhaps the future. And in this story, there's the dreams of 4 young men. They had Laguasongana. Who were their dreams? Their dreams were the things that they wished for, and they knew how to get them. They'd heard of this one, like Moshab, named Gluskomba among the Abenaki, Gluskabe among the Penobscot, Gluskak among the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq. They'd heard that after living with the people and helping the people for a long time, Gluskomba decided it was time to leave human beings to make their own way, to hopefully remember the stories and the lessons of Gluskomba. But Gluskomba needed to let human beings figure these things out on our own, and that's where we are today. They say that Gluskomba still lives far from human beings on an island where he sits inside of his own wigwam. He sits inside that wigwam and each day takes from his nephew, Muspas, a stick and begins to work that stick. And by the end of each day, he's fashioned one arrow. He takes that arrow and puts it in the other corner of his wigwam. Eventually, they say that wigwam will be completely full of arrows, and when it is, Gluskomba will return to the land to remind us of all those things that we forgot. In addition, it said, sitting in that wigwam, that if anyone comes to visit Gluskomba, if they can find him, which wouldn't be easy to do at all, but if they could, he would give them one of those wishes that they had. Well, these 4 young men had great dreams and wishes, and so they worked together to fashion a very strong and powerful canoe, because they knew that it was when Gluskomba left the people, he stepped out onto an island, flipped that island over and turned it into a stone canoe, and paddled off into Sobagok, the ocean. Paddled off through the Tugoak, the waves, and disappeared off into the horizon. Well, those men had fashioned a powerful canoe that could go through the ocean waves, which are themselves, as I mentioned, living things, Tugoak. They paddled through those waves. These 4 young men were young and strong, and they were able to push their canoe away from the shore and get further and further out into the water. And as they looked back, they could barely even see the shore. It said in a language that it appeared like a bowstring on the horizon. They traveled so far. Hope. But then they were tested. Those Tugoak were a test. But the next test that came was Gizalom Sin, the wind, created by Watusin, the wind bird. And one of those young men, as that wind blew, he knew that it was a wind bird who was flapping its wings so hard, their journey would go no further. Their canoe would surely be flipped over by that wind. But he was a great singer, and he began to sing one of the many lullabies that he'd learned. He sang, Pailoni snood kwasen, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, no. Pailoni snood kwasen, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, no. Hey yo, hey. Hey, 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 Hey-oh, hey-oh, hey-oh. He sang that Penobscot lullaby, and it was so powerful that not only had the windbird Wautusen folded its wings and fallen asleep, but all those Tugoak, those waves, they'd fallen asleep as well, and the ocean was flat. The water was crystal clear, and they were able to paddle on top of it very quickly and quietly as they continued on their journey. Now they noticed something, though, new waves being formed ahead of them. These were not the Tugoak. This was another creature altogether. There's many names. Some people call it Saskuk, Msaskuk, Tataskuk. It was a great serpent. That serpent, see its back coming up out of the water, and it was coming and turning. It had seen them, and it was coming towards them. Now they had a great, powerful war canoe, but this serpent's mouth was bigger than their entire canoe. They could see that it could swallow them with one gulp. Hope, one of those young men, was a great maker of things, and he was a good carver. He grabbed a piece of wood that he brought with him and began to whittle. As he saw that serpent's back come up out of the water and its head, he carved that wood to look just like that serpent, so much like that Msaskok that when he placed it in the water, that little wooden carving began to swim. And it swam straight down towards the bottom of Sobagok, the ocean. And perhaps protecting its territory, that great serpent chased after that wooden carving, and those men were safe to continue again on their journey in the ocean. Oh, well, now they were met by another obstacle as they paddled. There was a great wall in front of them of fog, Bizagawan, thick air, literally. That Bizagawan was so thick they could not see at all, and they weren't sure what to do. But one of those young men was great at knowing the stories, and they said, oh, I remember. They say that Buskomba paddled that stone canoe out into the ocean, and when he found the perfect spot, flipped it back over and made a wigwam on top of it. He sits in that wigwam making those arrows and smoking his pipe, his udamungan. As he smokes that, the pigadak, the smoke, he blows it up through the smoke hole, and it circles around the island, keeping it hidden. This isn't Bizagawan. This is pigadak, Ziagama, udamunganik. Even that udamungan is considered alive to have spirit. And this, he said, is the smoke from that pipe of Buskomba. We should go, we should paddle directly into this fog. Well, the men trusted him, and they paddled in to that fog. For a long time, they couldn't see anything at all, but eventually their canoe struck land. Hope. They pulled their canoe up onto the shore. They flipped it over. They walked onto that island, and sure enough, there in front of them, there was a wigwam, very small. They had to get down on their hands and knees to crawl into the door of that wigwam. But once they crawled through that door, it opened up into a great forest. Bizoakami-gok, a forest they'd heard about, one from long ago with great, tall, perfectly straight white pine trees. They walked through that forest for a long time, and they found a great longhouse in the center of that forest. They scratched on the door, katskanzi, it's the old way of knocking on a bark home. They heard a voice from inside. It said, Pidigada, Nidombak, enter, my friends. And those men entered that lodge. There they saw, sitting across from a great fire, Buskomba put an arrow beside and said, Kagwi, asidam mungan Nidomba. What are your wishes, my friends? Well, the first man to step forward was a great warrior. He was tall and strong, but he always worried that someday in the field of battle, he might meet someone who's taller and stronger than he was, and he wouldn't be able to defeat them, and his people would be in danger. In order to protect my people, he said to Buskomba, I wish that I could be taller and stronger than anyone in the land. Buskomba nodded and handed this man a bag. He said, open this bag when you're safe inside your wigwam, and you will have your wish. He said, Kitsi Ulioni, great thanks. The second man stepped forward, was a great storyteller. He knew all the stories, but he told Gluskomba he worried that the young people didn't listen the way they used to and stories were being forgotten. He did his best to share them, but he worried someday he would grow old and die, and some of the stories would die with him and be lost. And so it is, Gluskomba, he said. I wish that I could live forever. Gluskomba handed him a bag as well, told him not to open it till he was safe in his home, and he would have his wish. The next man to step forward said, Gluskomba, I'm a great maker of things. I have beautiful clothing, I have a beautiful home. But all these things, they wear out, they get old, and I have to constantly work to replace them. And so that I could be a great role model to the young and old alike, I wish that I could be richer than anyone in the land. And Gluskomba handed him a bag as well. Told him not to open it till he was safe at home. He'd have his wish. The fourth man in his final wish stepped forward and told Gluskomba he was a hunter, but that it was hard sometimes to bring home enough food to feed his family, to feed the elders in his community, and so he wished only to be a good provider. Gluskomba nodded and handed him a bag. Told him not to open until he was safe at home. He agreed and said, Kitsi Uliuni, great thanks. And those men left that lodge. Ulinano Almazi. They climbed out into that forest. They walked through that forest. They climbed out through the door of that small lodge, and there was their canoe. They flipped it over and they began to paddle home. They were so excited to get back to their wigwam, to have their wishes come true. What had taken them a long time with many challenges was such an easy trip home, guided perhaps by Gluskomba's magic. Just 4 dips of their paddles into the water, and they were back to the shore, the Sinolzi Sovago. And there was an aondi, a path. That man who wished to be taller and stronger than anyone said, oh, I recognize this path. It leads to my Odana, to my village. I'll get out here and take this path. Jumped out of the canoe and began to walk along that path. He walked up onto a great hill. When he got to the top of that hill, he looked down the forest beneath, and he could see smoke rising up through the trees. He knew that that was a smoke from the central fire of his community. He also knew that if he were just a little taller, he could look right down into his community, and his people would look up and see him standing there taller and stronger than anyone. They'd know he was no fool, that he had in fact found Gluskomba. So many had ridiculed his journey. He looked at that bag. He thought, perhaps there's some kind of ointment, something I could drink in here, just get a little bit of it to make myself just a little bit taller so I could look down and my people would see me standing here. So he opened the bag just to look and see what was inside, and when he did, he was changed. Taller and stronger than anyone in the land, he'd become a white pine tree, standing there on top of that mountain, looking right down into his village. Everyone could look up and see him. Well, as those 3 remaining men paddled that canoe up the coast, the second saw another path and said, I'll take this path that leads to my community. He jumped out of the canoe and began to walk. Now, he was the man who wished to live forever, and he went through the Bizawakamigok to get home. That trail went through a deep, dark patch of woods. And as he wandered through that woods, thinking of all the stories he knew, all those monster stories, he started to get sagazul. He started to get scared. He thought, perhaps there's a bitolo here. A mountain lion could jump out at me. A kiwakwa. Those man-eaters could still be here from winter. Wasn't that long ago? He got so scared. Yet he looked down at that bag that he was clutching in his hands and thought, whatever Gluskomba has given me, he would understand it if I open it now. I may not even make it home. So he opened that bag just to look inside, and all of a sudden, he was changed into a great big boulder, sitting right in the middle of that trail where he sits to this day. They say if you come to that rock in the middle of that trail and sit and listen, maybe offer it a little udamo, a little tobacco, you may hear a story. It knows all the stories to this day. Well, there were just 2 men left. That man had wished to be a good provider. He said, I'll take this path, this next one. This leads to my community. He jumped out of the canoe, leaving just that one who'd wished to be richer than anyone in that canoe. And he thought, oh, I've inherited this canoe. I'm already richer. My wish is coming true. And he looked down at that bag in his hand and he thought, I wonder how all the things that I could ever want could fit in this little bag. Perhaps Blue Scuba tricked me. I should check while I'm still in this canoe and make sure I have everything I need. And he opened that bag up as he sat in that canoe. And when he opened it, things started to pop out. Just as promised, everything he dreamed of popped out of that canoe. He was richer than anyone in the land. Those things just kept popping out. He was so excited to see the beautiful things that he now had, and they all were his. So they landed inside of his new canoe. Pretty soon that canoe became full, and those things, they just kept popping out of his bag. They started to land right on top of him and covered him until there were so many things inside his canoe that it bloop, 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 sank to the bottom of Solbach, the bottom of the ocean, where he died richer than anyone in the land. There was one man left, and he did just as Blue Scuba had asked. He walked all the way on that trail till he reached his wigwam. He went into his wigwam, he sat down, and only then did he open up that bag. And when he opened the bag, nothing, he didn't change, nothing popped out of it. In fact, the bag was empty. He turned it inside out, he wasn't sure what to do. But he'd been gone a long time. His dream had taken him away from his community for far too long. The people were hungry, the elders, his family. He needed to go hunting, and so he went to sleep. Woke up in the morning, and he headed out. He hunted for a long time, and a great big bull moose, towards the end of the day, stepped right out in front of him. He took one shot, and that moose fell. He was able to bring it home and feed his family well, and the elders in his community. And ever since that day, after that day, that man would go out and hunt. He'd always bring home just enough to be a good provider, and people would see him and say, there, that's a man who is truly blessed by a wish from Blue Scuba. Oh, and that is the end of that story.
We'll be moving into the question and answer session soon, but I wanted to say a few words before we did that. It's important to recognize, as I said at the start, how important water is. I mentioned the Cree people because of the James Bay Project. The waters of their land are full of mercury. They no longer can live the way they used to. We mentioned the Wampanoag people who are being kept from the healing waters of their own recognition as indigenous people. We need to remember that. We also have had the example of the Lakota people from Standing Rock just a couple of years ago, trying to stand up for the Missouri River to prevent, unfortunately, they did not do so, but they're still not giving up that oil pipeline. In fact, right now in South Dakota, they're passing laws to make it illegal to protest against pipelines. We have a lot of work ahead of us. We can look ahead, but we can also look behind. I always try to remember to acknowledge those who were my friends and teachers, people like Madawi Lasses, Little Loon, and Abenaki Elder, who taught us so many things and inspired us to return to our language. I think of people like Atian Lolo, Stephen Laurent, whose own father was one of the Abenaki people who wrote an actual guide to the Abenaki language. I think of all those people. We need to keep them in mind. We need to remember they are there and we are here. And if we join our hands together, even though right now at this point we're keeping social distancing, we can join our spirits together. We can reach out to each other and make that circle strong and maintain the strength of that circle. I think that we always have to remember, whichever way we go, there is a river flowing. I was taught many years ago that there is a little ceremony you can do. Clear your mind and find a place where there is a crossing over a stream or a river. Walk halfway across and stand there and feel the flow of that stream and feel which way you are drawn. Are you drawn upstream? Are you drawn downstream? Which way is your life going? I know I still feel myself drawn upstream, for there are many things we all need to do. And of course, one thing we need to do now is see if there are questions that people want to ask us. Either myself or Jesse will do our best to answer. Just remember that we know a few things, but we don't know everything. And I'm still learning and have a lot more to learn.
Answer. We don't have a lot. I'm looking at the questions. We don't have a lot. I'm not sure if there's a better way to get more questions, but we do have a lot more we'd love to share. One question we've asked about the longhouse, if it's warm or not. It happens to be warm because this longhouse is inside of our education center, the Indakina Education Center, where we're coming to you tonight live. We have this small longhouse. We also have another longhouse that's outside, which isn't quite as warm, but luckily Sigwan, spring has returned, so it's a bit warmer than it's been lately. This one is inside of our education center, so we are quite warm in here. I also pointed out earlier when we were doing our sound and video check that this painting, this mural, which you can see behind us, at least part of it, was painted by University of Michigan students who were here acting as interns just a few weeks ago before the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic began. They were with us for a week, and they are just incredibly talented. If any of you are joining us, Kitsi Uliuni again, thank you again for this work. If you look into the longhouse, we say you can look all the way through and come out in pre-Columbian times. On the other end, there's a Nolumbeka, a deer, and Indakina, as it was long ago. Really, really beautiful painting. And an opportunity to see how people lived as families in these extended rafters. In fact, the word Haudenosaunee, Iroquois name for themselves, the people of the extended rafters, or the people of the longhouse. Each family would live in different sections of these long houses, and the Abenaki people, especially on Lake Champlain, had adopted this style as well, of longhouses along with wigwams and conical wigwams, more similar to teepees in their shape. So several different styles of homes, the largest of which would be these longhouses. Big difference is what they would be covered with. The one that I'm in now is covered in elm bark, similar to the way the Haudenosaunee have always done things, where the Abenaki, our people, would cover them instead in birch bark. So a little bit about our center, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the future and offer one more song that perhaps my father could share on flute, because we haven't heard a lot of flute here today, and I'll introduce it. I'll let him introduce it with, or play it on the flute, and then I'd like to sing it as well. We're very, very closely connected as Abenaki people, often said Abenaki within the language, because we stress the third syllable from the end of the word. So rather than saying Abenaki, you hear people say Abenaki. Both are just fine. Abenaki is just closer to the pronunciation in the language. And our closest relatives within our language are the Penobscot people. This song, Little Pines, I sang up at Odanak. It's been sung there on a drum group that I was a part of in the early 90s, but it originated from all that I know from the Penobscot people. It gives thanks to the little pine trees that represent the potential to someday be like those great big white pine trees inside of Luskomba's longhouse, the pine trees that reach their branches out to protect the next generation of young people. So this is Little Pines. No, Junda Musi Totua. No, Junda Musi Totua. No, Junda Musi Totua. Kwi Hawani, Kwi Hawani. pesese tutuas, Kyuta pesese tutuas, Kyuta pesese tutuas, Kyuta pesese tutuas. Kwe hawaneo, kwe hawaneo, kwe hawaneo, kwe hawaneo. Benita Moses tutuas, benita Moses tutuas, benita Moses tutuas, benita Moses tutuas. Kwe hawaneo, kwe hawaneo, kwe hawaneo, kwe hawaneo, kwe hawaneo, kwe hawaneo. So a question a little bit more about Guskabi and the relationship with the Great Spirit or mystery. It's a really wonderful question. I'll answer a little bit of what I know. My father knows a lot more than I do. I'm a linguist, but I will say that Guskabe, the word itself, Guskabe, is said Guskabe within Penobscot, Gluskop in Mi'kmaq, Malsi, Passamaquoddy, and then Gluskomba in Abenaki. The word means klus is to speak, kluzi. Ka is to cause, ka. So gluska is cause speech. And then omba is a human being, abe in Penobscot or ab in Malsi, Passamaquoddy, Mi'kmaq. So it's a person who's created from speech. Some people say that means he creates himself through his speech. Gluskabe is the first one who shaped like a human being, often said to have shaped himself from that which was left over of creation. So Gluskabe is a creator, has that power to change things because he's been shaped from, in some cases, the dust of creation itself. So therefore, Gluskomba is able to act in a way that you may think of a creator to act, but often too, Gluskomba makes mistakes. He may brag. In some cases, the idea Gluskomba means the liar. We've heard that as a translation, but really it speaks of how he talked sometimes maybe perhaps a little too much about himself or felt too full of himself the way we as humans can. We need to emulate and see that he can be like a trickster. We could make a mistake and learn from it. And Gluskomba makes those mistakes and learns from them. But the Kitsinowask, Kitsi is great, Niwask is spirit. Kitsinowask is something that came before, that is much larger than Gluskomba, who, like us, is just a part of that great mystery, of that great spirit of Kitsinowask. Do you want to add any more to that? About Gluskabe and Kitsinowask?
In European culture, often the creator is seen in the shape of a man, yes, a male man, not as a person. And in our traditions, the creator, the great mystery, is just that. It is the great spirit, the great mystery that cannot be explained or understood by we human beings, but it is always there. I remember a story that I was told from my friends who are from the area that we now call Long Island, the people who are of an Algonquin tribal nation there as well. And those folks say that long ago, a couple of missionaries came among them and wanted to know if these Puspatuck people or Shinnecock people had any idea of the creator. I'm afraid the missionaries expected that these native people would be pretty ignorant. But instead, what they did was this. They drew a circle in the dirt, a very large circle. And then in the center of that large circle, they made a smaller circle. The missionaries were surprised. They said, well, what is this? They said, that large circle is the eye of the great mystery. And that small circle in the center is we human beings. Wherever we go, we are seen by the great mystery. We're always in the eye of the Creator. Someone was asking actually about what I am wearing. If you may notice on top of my head, This is called a gostowe in Haudenosaunee in the Mohawk language. And in fact, it was made by a friend of ours who is a Mohawk elder, a storyteller, a language keeper named Bill Laurent. It's called the Asalquan in the Abenaki language, a head covering. And the story that Bill told us is that long ago, when there was great turmoil among the Haudenosaunee people, the five nations were fighting each other constantly. A messenger called the Peacemaker came and told the people to live together in peace. They formed the Great League of Peace of the Haudenosaunee. Now, the young men in this one particular village liked that idea, so they went to a nearby village where they had been engaged in conflict with those people. Perhaps it was an Oneida village on one side of Mohawk village on the other. They said, "We've come to make peace." And the people of that village said, "How could you say you have come to make peace when you have bows and arrows with you, weapons of war?" Well, those young men realized they'd made a mistake. They said, "We will prove our peaceful intent." Then they took all of the arrows and stripped the feathers from every arrow. Then took the feathers and stuck them on top of their caps. For an arrow stripped of its feathers cannot fly straight and be used as a weapon. And when people wear these costores, according to my friend Bill Laurent, it is a sign that they come in peace. I should also mention that the Akwesasne Mohawk people, many of the people of Akwesasne have ancestors who are Abenaki. In fact, the word Akwesasne is an Algonquin or an Abenaki word, which means where the partridge drums, which is what the Mohawk people will tell you it means. But they also are people who are connected to us by blood, by history. And like all human beings, we are connected on the same river. There is actually a really beautiful piece of wampum that is part of Iroquois tradition. It's a very old wampum belt, and wampum actually comes from our Algonquin people. The Quahog clam has little colors of purple and white on its shell, and those would be made into shell beads and then strung together in patterns, not for money, which is how they were used by Europeans at one point, by American white people, but indeed they were used to represent relationships, agreements, treaties, understanding between people. And this particular wampum belt, which I really admire, is called the two-row wampum. It shows two white lines against a purple field. And those two white lines stand for two rivers. In fact, we did a representation of that on the back, or I should say on the front and back of our little book of poetry, Two Rivers, because those two rivers are like two canoes, either purple or white, representing the rivers. And those canoes are the canoe of the indigenous people, the canoe of the newcomers, and those canoes are going down the same river towards the same ocean and not interfering with each other in their passage. I'll let Jesse come back in and see if there's another question that he can answer.
The decorations on our shirts, thank you for the question from Anne. So first, the shirts themselves are ribbon shirts, and the ribbon shirt is seen being worn across North America by indigenous people. It is in the design of the original buckskin clothing that would be made out of deer skin. But very quickly, cloth was traded, especially here on the East Coast, so early on that the Maliseet, when Samuel de Champlain came down in the early 1600s, very early, he saw the Maliseet people and called them shirt wearers because they were wearing cloth shirts rather than buckskins already that early on. So really quickly, people were getting cloth, but they were using the same patterns and designs of buckskin, including even the fringe. But the fringe began being replaced no longer using leather, but instead using silk. As time has gone on, silk has come in many different colors. The shirts that we wear have the fringe on. I will say too that the fringe itself on buckskin both looked beautiful. It broke up your outline as well, so that as a hunter, you'd be able to blend more into your environment and not be seen by animals as the fringe would blow with the wind. It also worked to help wick moisture away from your body, as it would be placed along many of the seams and would keep the rain from soaking into your buckskin and getting you really cold. It would wick the water away. So it had some really important purposes. Of course, now ribbon shirts are worn at powwows, at native gatherings, at ceremony, in performance as well, to help ourselves identify and take pride in our culture. People wear ribbon shirts. Ours are specifically made in using the colors of the Abenaki Nation, the green of the growing plants, the red of the blood of the people, and then the black of the earth itself. So we have those as our primary colors, in both my father's ribbon shirt and mine. In addition, we have a number of different pins and ornamentations of things that we've gathered over the years that are important to us. I think most notably, I like to wear bear. We're connected to the bear people. We're awasos within our family. So I have a lot of bear and 4 directions. And my father has different pins we've been given by different tribal nations that we visit. I think we both have a couple pins from the Seneca Nation, who we'd actually have been with this week. We're to be in Salamanca this week for a week in residency, which we've been doing each year, and just having an incredible time working there with the teachers, their own language revitalization work, and doing storytelling. And we certainly miss them if any of them have joined us, anyone from out in Western New York. Hopefully we are able to reschedule soon. We miss the opportunity to see them, and we carry them with us, and many other things with us as a part of our ribbon shirts that we wear. So great question, Ulioni. Thank you. So a question about seeds. I wanted to say something about seeds, which is, I think, is really powerful within the language. The importance of seeds can be seen at a very root level within the term for a seed, which is skani min. Skani min has a root at the beginning, ska. And we've heard that. We all know that word. We say it all the time. We say skunk. When we say skunk, we're speaking the Abenaki language, and it means sprayer. But that same sound of a skunk, skunk, in Abenaki is the word skani min, ska. We hear ska at the beginning. Ska could also mean ska, to stand. Sigikanamin is to squeeze something tight. Sigwani hlas is a hawk. It grabs onto things tight. Squa, squa is the ending. Nonk squa is a young girl. Squahla is a female bird. Ska in skani min, that same sound has something to do with potential energy that can be released. Sikwan is spring, the springing forward. And the seasons are themselves verbs. Sigwan means like to spring, it is happening. So sik and skani min lets us know that those seeds have the potential clearly for growth and are extremely important to us as people. And it is at this time of year that those seeds bring about change. I wondered, I don't know if my father would want to share, but we do have some pretty powerful stories about seeds. And I know there's one that comes to mind that he tells better than I do, that maybe will give you a better relationship to the coming of some seeds to our people.
It is said that long ago, there was a man who was a planter, a really good planter, in the sense that not only did he raise the corn, the beans, and the squash, who are called the Three Sisters by our friends, the Haudenosaunee, but he also always grew enough so that he could share it with all the people of his village. He would have enough for them to eat, and then more put aside to keep through the starving moon, the season when all the food runs out. There were these granaries that he had put aside and buried in woven baskets. And there was also a reserve of those same seeds for planting in the spring. Well, this one year, he went out and prepared his fields and planted the corn, the beans, and the squash. They began to grow up from the ground, and then a frost came and killed every single plant. But he was not worried. This had happened before. He had plenty of seeds. He planted a second time. And the second time, as the days passed, again, those seeds began to grow up. But this time, great flocks of birds came flying in and plucked up all those little plants. They were all gone. But he still had more seeds in reserve. And this time, this third time when he planted them, he was a little bit worried because the days were at their longest now. And it is said when the days are at their longest, in fact, my grandfather used to say, the last day in this part of the world you can plant corn is on the 4th of July to make sure you get a crop. And it was around that time, the middle of the summer season. And this time, those seeds, they grew very strong, very tall, and then the sun began to beat down. The rain stopped falling. And even though he brought water from a nearby stream, that stream dried up. And those seeds shriveled and died. Now, all that he had left was that little bit of that little store of seeds, which was just in case of an emergency. And he planted those seeds, hoping against hope that they would manage to make it. But when they had reached the point where they were about to bear fruit, a frost came and killed every plant. What would happen now? How would he and his family and the people of the village that depended upon him survive through those cold seasons when the snow came down and the days became short and freezing time returned? This man, though, had always remembered something. Always be thankful to the Creator. In fact, every day he would say his thanks. Every night he would say his thanks. And so once again, that night when all seemed hopeless, he spoke a prayer of thanksgiving to the great mystery, Kasinawask, the Great Spirit, and laid himself down to sleep. And as he slept, he began to dream. In his dream, he heard a voice speaking, telling him to look up. And he looked up and he saw a light, a bright light at the foot of his sleeping rack. And he heard the voice, "You have been faithful to your people. And now I give you a special gift and a time in which to use this gift." When he woke the next morning, the sun was shining. It was as warm as if it were summer again. Even though the cold wind of winter had been blowing, now it was warm outside. And there at the foot of his bed was a bag. He opened it, and it was full of big seeds, bigger than he'd ever seen before. He walked outside and began to plant those seeds. The people of the village thought he was crazy. What are you doing? But he did not pay attention. He just planted seed after seed as that bright sun shone down. And by the time he reached the end of the first row, the seeds were growing at the other end. By the time the second sunrise came, they were the height of his knees. By the third sunrise, up to his shoulders, a squash spread across the ground, the corn standing tall, the beans twining around the corn stalks. And by the end of that week, everything was ripe and ready to harvest. And with the help of the people of the village, they brought in the biggest harvest they'd ever brought in. And when they brought the last of that harvest in, the cold wind of winter began to blow and the snow began to fall. Now, ever since then, we do not have those special seeds, but we do have that time, which is called in the Benaki, Nabum Amoba, a person's summer, or as they say in New England, Indian summer. That is how that story goes.
The tradition of weaving among Algonquin people certainly is true. It's mentioned in many stories, the making of small bags of weaving. And leguansa is the word for to weave. Leguansa and leguasongan is a dream. And I've actually heard that the root is connected. The idea of when we're dreaming, we're weaving thoughts together with our lives. And it said that each morning people would ask, what was it that you dreamed? Because dreams were so important. We heard of the power of the dream in that story again that my father told. And one more story about the very, very first seeds that we were given. And I was lucky enough in the community of Odanak, which I mentioned earlier, up along the St. Francis River, where so much has been maintained for Abenaki people, to be a part of the community up there as a visitor for several years, when some traditions were going on, and I know things are still happening, but one of the traditions that I got to sit in on with Cecile, who I mentioned earlier, Cecile Nolet, her sister, Sophie Nolet, and others, was the Green Corn Festival in the old Kizos Center, which has since been torn down. This was about 1993. This was a tradition that dates back to the time, they say, when the first seeds ever came to people. The Abenaki people at one time were just hunters and gatherers, like that young man's wish to be a good provider. The only way we would survive was by gathering, hunting, and planting came to the people by sacrifice from, they say, the first woman. She saw her children starving, and to tell the story very briefly, she let her husband know that she would pass. In order to let her children and him live, she would give her own body, and for him to take her body and use it to create the very first seeds. And so that is what was done. Her body was used, dragged along the fields, and corn grew. And they knew that that corn was ready to eat when the hairs, like the hair from her head, came down on those ears of corn. The seeds would be gathered, and I was lucky enough to be a part of this Green Corn Festival. I'd like to share the song that I heard sung then, that I was lucky enough to sing and still share, that would be sung during this festival. And the words are talking about the hairs that come off the corn. And elders in the community, and Sophie was one of them, were chosen to stand up front. And corn would be danced up to them. And they look at the corn and they'd either nod, or onda, and they take the corn that was good first for planting, and they put it aside to save for the next year. And then that which was not needed to plant would go on to be eaten in a great festival of eating corn. In fact, Skamoni Kizos is one of the names of that moon on late August and September, a moon of eating corn, the corn harvest moon. And so this really important idea from the very first seeds long ago to the corn that we have today is that it was the women who were choosing which seeds would be planted. And then over years, they were truly the botanists. Indigenous women from all over the Americas truly did this. This really is the history. They took the grasses and slowly changed them into the corn that fed and feeds the entire world today. It was a gift of Indigenous women to the world. And this is that song, Green Corn Song, from the Green Corn Festival. It begins singing to the Corn Mother, that one I mentioned, in 4 directions, saying Nigawis, or Nigawis, my mother. Yanigawis, Yanigawis, Yanigawis. Yanigawis, 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 Yanigawis. Oh, Lariki, we are on the 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 Is there a translation of songs on Jesse's CD of the Abenaki and Algonquin songs? And can you explain the word sound you say before uliuni? Sure. Kitsi. Usually before saying thank you, you say kitsi, which means big or great. Kitsi, it also means old. Kitsi can mean big, great, or old. The very first sounds of most words are almost swallowed and lost. There is a kitsi, but it's very quiet. The stress is at the very last syllable and the third from the last syllable of words. So take good care of yourselves. Ulinana wow mazi, ulinana wow mazi. So we hear that stress towards the end, but not at the beginning. Kitsi, big, strong, or big, great, or old. So all those things are together. And as far as translations for that CD, Songs of the Wabanaki, I believe, that was a collection of 40 plus songs that I was lucky enough to learn as I sang on the drum at Odanak, Awaso Sigwan, Spring Bear drum in the 90s, as well as the drum of Missisquoi community that was headed up by Tom Obamson, was the drum keeper of that drum. And we were singing songs that were from all the Wabanaki peoples, and a lot of songs that were being collected in Missisquoi and up at Odanak made it onto that CD. Unfortunately, translating most of them is hard to do because they're so old, like the one I just sang. They've been reduced to vocable sounds. At some point, there were surely translatable words there, but they have been sung and passed down from one generation. Even the languages themselves have changed. So where maybe the song has remained true, it's in many cases you're unable to translate today. Some of the songs, however, on there do have translations. And if you'd like to drop me an email and ask, I could point you to the ones and give you a sense of what those are.
Original ones?
Yeah, any of the original. You can hear the ones that have some clearer sounding words. Some of those are ones. There's been one in there that sings for hunting, Nadia Ali, and others. So, see if we have. I would like to know more about the peacemaker. If I'll turn that over to my father, Leonie.
I sort of have a big smile on my face right now because, as I think many of you do know, I'm a writer as well as a storyteller and a maintainer of our traditions. And I have been fortunate over the last 40 years to learn a great deal about Haudenosaunee traditions from so many different elders that it would be hard to list them all, starting with Dewa Senta, Alice Papano, who was the Eel clan mother, and Onondaga gave me my Haudenosaunee name, and many, many, many people, including our dear friend Tom Porter, who was the elder at the Ganacho Halege community about 30 miles from here, who constantly working with that Mohawk community. They're very dear friends. I have 2 new books coming out about the Peacemaker. The first one is a novel from Dial, which will be published sometime in the next few months. It's called just that, Peacemaker. It tells the story of how the Peacemaker came through the eyes of a young man in a native village who observes what's happening around him, is disturbed by it, has lost an uncle, a dear friend, and is not sure what path to follow. And then the Peacemaker shows up in the course of the story. The other book is one that will be out next year from Wisdom Tales Press, and we're still working on the final title for that. So it might be the story of the Peacemaker as a sort of subtitle. The first title of it will not be yet decided until a little bit further on. And that I was fortunate enough to actually tell the story of the Peacemaker from beginning to end, and to have it illustrated by David Fadden. David Fadden is an incredible Mohawk artist whose father, John Fadden, is an illustrator and a very dear friend of mine, illustrated many of the books I did, and whose grandfather is Tohono Dolan's Ray Fadden, the founder of the Six Nations Indian Museum, located in Anchiota, New York. And there in Anchiota, that museum is open during the summertime, but not during the winter or the late fall. And it is being run by David Fadden right now. So those 2 books are forthcoming. There's been a lot written about the Peacemaker, and there are many different stories about the Peacemaker, some of which are somewhat contradictory. Some of the traditional stories talk about Iontwatha or Hiawatha as being the most important person in the making of peace. The tradition I have learned from many different elders is that the Peacemaker was born to a woman among the Wendat or the Huron people. He had the idea of peace from his very earliest days. He was a gift from the Creator. This woman had not been with a man, and yet she gave birth to him. He always spoke of peace, and finally he made a canoe of white stone and traveled across the lake to the land of the Haudenosaunee, who were, as my dear friend Jake Swamp, the late, the wonderful Jake Swamp, who was the founder of the Tree of Peace Society, said, we were the worst people in the world back then. We really needed peace. And indeed, it was a time when the five nations were all fighting each other, and it was an eye for an eye, a life for a life. And when the peacemaker came, he did a number of things which were miraculous, and eventually the five nations joined together in peace. They symbolically planted a war club, and at Onondaga, they put a tree in what was a symbol of peace. Its four white roots stretched to all the directions. You could come underneath its shade and live by tracing those roots under the shade of the great pine tree in peace. It is said, and I believe this is very clearly true, that the Haudenosaunee League, with its 50 representatives chosen by the clan mothers, is the forerunner of our American idea of democracy. And Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers, was a person who was deeply influenced by that Iroquois League, and indeed mentioned it on a number of occasions as a way that the different 13 colonies could join together in a similar fashion. The quarters, before the new design came in, on the back of the quarter was a picture of an eagle holding 13 arrows in its claws. The Haudenosaunee eagle sits on top of the great tree of peace, holding the 5 arrows of the 5 nations, which bound together are hard to break, and singly will break easily. There's a lot more that could be said about the peacemaker. I will say simply this, that the story is one that we all should know and that we all should aspire to, that idea of living together in peace. And remembering, in fact, it is the women who are the center of the peace. It is the women who bring life into the world. It is the women who, in the Haudenosaunee fashion, chose the leaders. And that is one place where, when American democracy was put together, they really left out a huge piece, which is the piece that the women hold as the center, as the head of the family, as the people who indeed are our truest leaders.
Closing song.
Any more questions?
It sounds like a number of the questions that were asked, even though we didn't see them, got answered to a degree. The idea of songs for crops, the green corn song clearly is one, and there would be many others. Songs sung even in the creation story, which was asked about the time of year the creation story would be told, would be between first and last frost. I've also heard it said that it was when we heard the thunder or was returned to the sky that we knew it was the end of that time when we'd be telling the story of creation and other stories that were reserved for that special time when we were all confined in our homes, much like we've been now. So perhaps we're due an extension on our storytelling season this year. Here, we still do have some snow coming down in the mountains. That is a sign there's still frosts happening. So there's still a bit of an extension in that time when stories would traditionally be told. But there were stories throughout the year that needed to be told, like the stories I began with, those trickster stories, the stories about raccoon. These are lesson stories, and children and adults, all of us make mistakes all the time. And so we need to hear those kind of lesson stories. So they would happen throughout the year, throughout the growing season. There were still mistakes that would be made in harvest. And so stories would be shared during the year about the trickster and others. But certainly there was a certain time for some stories when they would be told, and only told then. So great question there. One last question was about basket making. There's certainly a tradition of basket making among Algonquin people prior to contact. But that basket making tradition, just like the making of shirts, was influenced and changed. And new styles were introduced. And some of the ash basketry that's done now was influenced and had influenced European influences as well as indigenous roots. And very, very unique patterns and things that were done by Native people that were not done anywhere else in the world and still are, that make this uniquely a Mohawk style basket or an Abenaki style basket, which are honestly quite similar. There's a lot of similarities. We said there's a big relationship between Akwesasne and the Abenaki communities. So no surprise, there's a similarity there. Also in pottery. and other things in the Champlain Valley. That said, we'd like to do, I think, just one last peek here. Let's see if we have another question. Kitsi Uliuni, a lot of thank yous here from friends. Thanks for joining us, Kwai Kasko. It's been wonderful to have this time to share with you, and we hope we've answered, yeah, it looks like we've answered a good portion of the questions that you've had. We'd like to close things out with a traditional song to wish you a good journey. And to use the language, I'd say, uli, good. Uli, like an uliuni. Uli means good. Nanawal is take care. Nanawaldam is take care of something, but we're talking about taking care of someone. So nanawal ma means it's somebody, and the one who you should take care of first and foremost. We need to take good care of ourselves. So uli nanawal mazi, the Z brings it back onto you. Uli nanawal mazi, take good care of yourself. This song perhaps needs another line in there today. Kazil za, wash those hands. It's a part of uli nanawal mazi, taking good care of yourself. As well, uli pam kani, uli again. Pam is continually, goes on and on. Pum. Kani is traveling. We began traveling, so when we bid someone farewell, we say, continue to travel well. Uli pam kani, continue to travel well. On your journey back into your canoe, as it was long ago, back up the river. Those same rivers that were used to travel in the spring and the summer and the fall would still be the routes of travel even in the winter, as people would strap on their snowshoes and follow the rivers back to their communities. So uli pamkani, travel well by whatever means you travel. The nice thing is we've been brought to you tonight, so most of us don't have too far to go. But still, uli pamkani in all your journeys. Take good care of yourselves, travel well. And finally, kinamio, I say you I see, kinamio zi, you I will see, mina. Kinamio zi mina, I will see you again. So there's no sense of goodbye at all in this song, although it's a farewell song. So travel well, take good care of yourselves, and we will see each other again. So this will be our closing. This one certainly has a full translation. Ule pamkani, ule nanawamzi, namio zimina. 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 Uli pamkani, uli nanawamzi, namio zimina. Uli pamkani, uli nanawamzi, namio zimina. Uli pamkani, uli nanawamzi, namio zimina. Namio zimina. Uli pamkani, uli nanawamazi, kanamio zimina ni dombak, kitsiuliuni.
Takitsiuliuni ni dombak. Adios. Adios.